All right, it's working. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hopefully you have made it to the correct place to our discussion about AI and information literacy instruction in the composition class and obviously in library research and all other kinds of good things. I'm Deb Bauder. I'm the research instruction outreach librarian at Penfield.
And I'm Kenneth Nichols. I teach in the English department and I'm a writing fellow.
So academic librarian instructors and English composition instructors have a lot of intersecting interests, even before AI came into the picture, but that's even more true now. So the goal remains the same, which we have here, which is teaching students to think critically and to be responsible consumers of information and creators of information and content. But the proliferation of AI tools requires us to put an even greater emphasis on information literacy and sort of those accompanying creative thinking skills. And for hopefully everyone is familiar with information literacy at this point, but it's always good to be reminded, it is a cornerstone of library and first year composition instruction. And we put the SUNY Gen Ed framework here. Our goal is really to have students be able to use information effectively, to locate information effectively, use the right tools, to be able to evaluate information in meaningful ways and be aware of authority and validity and who's telling you what and when and why, and also to have an understanding of the sort of ethical dimensions of information use in terms of creating it and also disseminating information. So, thinking about the critical thinking process that are used to develop keywords, which are how you search library databases and search terms, but also the processes that you use to prompt AI, there's a lot of similarities. So in terms of, if we're using searching library databases as an example, the students have an assignment, right? So they get some ideas about it, and they have to put those ideas into the databases, right? So they translate their thoughts about it into words, and those words translate into resources once they put it into the databases. And then those resources spur further thoughts and ideas, which will translate into more words. So it's sort of this round and round process of critical thinking that they need to have in order to be able to be successful in library research, library database searching, and also AI use. So taking this a step further, we've laid this out here pretty clearly. You can see, so there's prompt engineering for generating AI output and keyword selection for searching library databases. And they're both really a bridge between the student mind or whoever is doing the research and the AI or the library resources. So you can see they require an understanding of the assignment or the project. They require selecting very relevant commands and reflecting and using those critical thinking skills we were talking about to narrow or broaden their topic, narrow or broaden their approach to the databases to get better search results. And there's always these challenging limitations that the technology presents, and also that the subject of their subject knowledge. So the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to create good prompt engineering, prompt engineers do good prompt engineering to generate good AI output, and also to do good library searching to get good results. And thinking about these parallel methodologies. So thinking about, in addition to these intersecting interests and the similar critical thinking processes, there's also parallel methodologies to how students use AI and library research to compose and to create their work, whether that's research or paper.
The point is that the needs that we have as English 102 instructors and librarian instructors are kind of the same but different in some ways. So the librarians are using keyword selection to figure out how to find the best books, papers, resources, whereas in English 102, the students are using AI for a great many things they shouldn't, but they can use it depending on the instructor's feelings about it, for generating outlines, generating ideas. summarizing papers or books, you trying to figure out keywords. Hey, OpenAI, can you give me 10 keywords for World War II? And so again, also in parallel are these methodologies. We have to emphasize to the students that research is a narrative within itself. If you're searching for things in the databases, you have to figure out how to narrow things down and figure out what you want. It's not just a one-step search. A silly one-step Google search is fine. Now, how many people are there in North Dakota? Okay, great. But when you're doing library searches, it's a lot more complicated, and it's a problem. Same thing with AI. It can be a journey to get what you want from the artificial intelligence. And it's a nonlinear process. Just Googling for a fact, okay, that's step one, is generally going to be fine. But when you're asking serious questions or trying to have the computer help you to arrive at serious truth, it's a lot different. Same thing with the keyword selection. Again, parallel processes. We came up with the term of productive meandering, where it might be hard if you start your paper at 6 in the morning on the day it's due. But the point is that you're just trying to figure out your subject when you do keyword searches or AI, and just play around, and you're going to find things that you didn't know and angles that didn't come to you beforehand. And trial and error. Again, we have to emphasize that you're going to get things wrong. You're going to come back with a search with no results. You're like, no results? How? I have a big subject. How can I have none? Well, it's because you had another search term that narrowed it way too much. And because I'm an unabashed nerd, it makes me think of the way that Geordie LaForge, the chief engineer of the Enterprise D, interacts with the computer. Geordie cannot just ask, computer, how can I save the ship from this energy-sucking monster? You can't do that. Instead, Geordie uses his vast knowledge of science and the ship and everything else to ask the right questions. Sometimes he asks the computer for a fact. Sometimes he asks, what happens if we reduce the power of the couplers by 20%? What would happen? And the AI can sometimes tell him that he's right, sometimes tell him that that's not going to work. The point is that it's a nonlinear process, but it's all done by Geordie. He's the one saving the day in the end. And that's something that we have to emphasize to the students.
And it's a narrative, so it's that sort of ongoing experience or a story, and that's true of research, and it's also true of using AI.
And stories have a protagonist, that's the student, and they have an antagonist. That's going to be, in this case, the AI or the library database. So in terms of using artificial intelligence to help you write your paper ethically, you're going to have big problems. One of them is that the computer will, as the experts call it, hallucinate and simply make things up, which I'll show you in a minute or two. It also, the AI, because it's a computer, it sometimes has trouble with nuance, just like metadata did at times, right? And it has, I found an inability to generate claims and arguments in the ways that many composition teachers and other professors, especially not in the hard sciences, want. And how does that work with the library, Deborah?
Yeah, so in terms of thinking about the way that library research has these sort of antagonistic intrusions as well, you can get random item records that are completely unrelated to what you're searching for. You can also get massive search results or no search results, or just completely things that are off the wall, not related. So there's a lot of similarities here you can see in terms of just in practice, in terms of these antagonistic intrusions. So we'll get to in a minute more about how to deal with them.
So I did an experiment for the paper where I pretended that I was one of my students doing one of my assignments. I have them choose a subject from prehistory, meaning before 1990. I don't care what it is, but they have to think of something that they want to research from the olden times, right? So I pretended that I was looking for stuff on D-Day, right? So I asked the AI. On the left is ChatGPT. On the right is Google Bard. I asked for, just like we'd ask our students, can I have two academic papers about D-Day? And so, as you can see on the left, wow, this looks pretty good, right? Journal History, that sounds like a really reputable journal. And Mark Barnes, that sounds like a historian, right? And there's even an abstract. And Mark Trachtenberg, that's a fancy scholar. Journal International Security. Like I tell my students, the more boring the journal title, the more authentic it is, right? International security. All right, that looks great. The only problem is I use my own skills to figure out these things don't exist. They don't exist. Mark Trachtenberg is indeed a scholar in military history, but this paper does not exist. Same thing, Mark Barnes is a scholar, but these are not real. These were hallucinated by the computer using its own, all the information it had been fed. And we'll talk about what kind of information that is. Same thing on the right with Google Bard. The Ambrose and the Hastings, as you can see about the books, those are highly regarded books by scholars. But those journal articles, those authors are real. It's all made up. And then when I asked for a URL for a couple of them, it gave me a completely different URL of the National Geographic. Like it was totally different. And so students have to understand that this is an opportunity as well, because we can help them learn how to find things in the databases, find things for real, because without, because I'm the teacher, my skills in figuring things out, I would have just believed this. You believe it because the computer said it, right? And the other problem, the trouble with nuance. So I asked the computer, can you give me 10 possible claims about D-Day? Because, the silly teacher's asking for claims. And so here we have a claim, right? Omaha Beach played a pivotal role in the success of the D-Day landings as the Allies needed to secure this critical beachhead to establish a foothold in Normandy. I mean, that's less of a claim, really, and more of a statement of fact, right? I'm not, that doesn't do much. Like if for most 102 teachers, right? We want something a little more argumentative, right? They'll call it an argumentative essay. So pretending to be the student, I said, can you make it more argumentative? And then, so what do I get? Omaha Beach was unequivocally the linchpin of the D-Day success, with the very fate of the Normandy invasion hinging on its capture. So it became more argumentative in tone, not argumentative as in something that we could debate about the D-Day landings, right? Because there's really no debate here, but it did change the tone, which has its own purpose, but not usually.
So you went from talking to Geordi, who's a very rational character on Star Trek, to talking to Worf, who's like the warrior, like, wow.
Yes,
So it really changed the tone, but not not
we
actually.
will capture the Normandy beach. Exactly. And circular reasoning. The last ChatGPT update, unless I'm mistaken, was I want to say January 2022. So it only has information from that date and before. And it's not all information ever, obviously. So it comes into circular reasoning. Something is true because it's true, and it's true because it's true, right? And garbage in, garbage out. Ego. I researched it, and that started in the 40s. And an Army signal officer was working with the first computer, and they realized that the worse stuff that you put into the computer, the worse results you're going to get out. So same thing here. I asked the AI to determine what it used to make the claims that I had asked it for. And it said, oh, hey, I used these books I told you about and these journal articles that I completely made up. So the computer was using the hallucinated papers to make more hallucinated information. And so it's a circular argument.
So we came up with some recommendations, thinking about all these similarities was actually really interesting, in terms of how AI, which initially to me particularly seemed like it's so intimidating in some ways. But if you start thinking about the ways that it's intimidating, but it's actually also very similar to other things that we do. So, there's a lot of parallel processes. There's a lot of parallel critical thinking skills that we're asking students and researchers to do. And somehow just going through this, even, putting together this presentation, and we've been writing about this, has made it all seem a lot more approachable for me personally. And we did come up with some recommendations of how we can use these emerging technologies and existing technologies to sort of reinforce students' traditional critical thinking and information literacy skills, which were, as librarians, we're always thinking about information literacy, but also obviously composition instructors and all the faculty are thinking about how we can guide these beginning scholars, and so they can understand how to use these tools better. So the first one in there is one that we already all do, but thinking about emphasizing it more. So emphasizing the process of source source evaluation. So that credibility, who's telling them what and when and why, really getting them to critically think about what's coming up. Encouraging them, like we talked about earlier, to understand the research process as this sort of narrative process. So they need to treat AI and the databases like Geordie does, right? So using this like layered inquisitive questioning that's always building upon their own thought, because
it's a partner. It's not something that does the work for you.
human thought's always going to be better than like just a computer.
And
So
and I also want to point out that one of the reasons that one of the ways we help students with source evaluation, and one of the problems we have now is that everything looks flat. It's not my concept, but it's true. You can have a Pulitzer Prize winning book about World War II, but you're reading it on a screen, and to students who are students, they're learning, it has the same credibility as a blog post or a tweet or anything else. So we have to remove we have to build the topography. So I'll write that down, book title, the topography of digital sources.
beyond that too, obviously emphasizing that those peer-reviewed or scholarly sources are behind a paywall. So the library and the college pays a lot of money for us to have access to it, for the students to have access to it. AI does not have access to it, at least at this point. So the students are not going to get the same scholarly sources that they're going to get if they just come right to the library.
And OpenAI and other companies are being sued by a lot of authors to remove their work from these databases. So who knows what happens in the future.
We recommend also obviously educating students about those hallucinations, because they really need to double check their sources. Like if it gives them an author that sounds great, or a journal name, or the title of a book, they need to take it back to the library databases and check and see if that's actually a real thing. And that goes back to source evaluation, and also an understanding of the hallucinations and the limitations of the AI.
It's also a good way to reinforce that students learn how to use the databases properly, to be able to find the journal in question, find the issue if it exists.
Exactly. So them pulling those materials up isn't necessarily, I personally would prefer they would just go to the databases to begin with. But if they choose to use AI for some of these things, they need to double check in the library databases, which, like you just said, will reinforce their skill set and cause them to be better researchers and critical thinkers. The last thing we put on here was requiring students to include those permalinks, or to show that they source the records from the library databases. It's another way to make sure that in fact they did not just grab something from AI and say this is absolutely true. So you can see all of these things really are about continuing to emphasize information literacy. It's just in new ways, and I think about all the ways that we've adapted to technology over the years, like when Google first came and we all thought like, oh, libraries are done, and it's just like, it turned out that Google is a tool that's useful, but we still need all the library databases and we still need librarians. And I think the same thing is true now with AI. It's gonna, as it's here longer, I think we'll sort of develop a bigger picture of what it is that we can actually do with it. And I think as long as we're continuing to emphasize those information literacy skills in students, that it'll be okay. I'm confident.
I'm a pessimist, but one hopes. So yeah, that's how librarians and first year composition teachers can try to work with AI to help students put out better work. And yeah.
Did anyone have any questions? That's our last slide, and I think we have like 3 minutes.
Yeah, we cited things. These are all real.
These are all real. These are very
promise.
real. So I'll leave the recommendations up if anyone has any questions. I think we just have 1 minute. So anyone? Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Stop recording.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.